I mean, I definitely get an opportunity now at Championship Gold. I intend to be AEW champion. That's why I'm here. I didn't come here to, like I had said before, I'm not here to help the young guys. I'm not here to do anything else but prove I'm the best. So that's what I plan on doing.
Hey Brian, Punk brought up your name when he was addressing Eddie in that infamous back and forth as somebody that also looked down on Eddie. How did you feel about him using your name when talking about Eddie like that?
Well, it was interesting because, you know, Eddie and I had actually had interviews where I pretty much said the same thing. You know, I think one of the things, one, I want to say this. Eddie's a very inspirational person, a very inspirational human being. But when I look at Eddie and CM Punk looks at Eddie, and you can see it tonight, right? You look at him. He's freaking awesome, right? What would happen if he put in that extra effort, right? Like, so, you know what I mean? Like, he works his ass off when he's out there. But one of the things right before we had our first match, so it was, I think we were in Miami, and so it was the week before. After Miami, he goes out till 3 in the morning. After the show, I'm back in my hotel room, foam rolling, stretching, getting ready so that my body's physically prepared for the next week. Eddie's shoulder right now is really banged up, right? I've been wrestling for 22 years. I feel invincible, right? Like, and I've been wrestling every single week since I started here. So there's putting in the work when you're wrestling, and then there's putting in the work when you're not wrestling, and I think that's the difference. But this is what I want to say about Eddie. One, he's got an incredible heart. Two, he's such a great wrestler. I don't know what you guys thought about that CM Punk Eddie Kingston match.
Great.
But is unbelievable. And sometimes I get jealous because I'm not that naturally talented. And I see him and I'm like, oh God, what if I had that, you know? So I think that's where the disappointment comes in. But then, this is one of the things that Tony wouldn't let air that I said about Eddie, is I said, fatigue makes cowards of us all. It's in every amateur wrestling locker room all across the country. Fatigue makes cowards of us all. I work my ass off, so I never get tired. Eddie's the one guy I know who gets tired and doesn't stop. And that just, I think, speaks to his heart.
Brian, we've seen you change up your arsenal quite a bit since you started this run here in AEW, and we've seen you win matches in different ways each time. So that some innovation against Miro. How important is that for you when telling these stories to have that element of surprise that anything at any moment can result in a win for you?
Well, I mean, realistically, the idea of like a finishing move is a relatively recent phenomenon in the history of pro wrestling. Like Lou Thesz would have regular things that he was good at that he would beat people with, but he had a variety of things that he would beat people with, and that was just a regular thing. You look at Dory Funk, you look at all the previous champions, all that kind of stuff. And so to me, it's not unusual. To me, that's wrestling, right? Like when you watch MMA, like sometimes guys mostly win with their right hand, but sometimes they win with other stuff. You know what I mean? So it's so that's the approach I like to take.
Brian, what was running through your match when you were in that ring with Minoru Suzuki?
Don't die. No, honestly, when I'm wrestling, it's weird. It's kind of like an out-of-body experience a little bit, and the sensation of it. I love the physicality. I love somebody like Minoru Suzuki, who just, you feel like you're in a fight, and it really just makes you feel alive. And so, like, I try not to think. It's almost a meditative experience where it's like you're just feeling everything, and and then afterwards, I go back, and like, there's this joy that you can't. Nothing else in life feels the same way. I would say like being around my kids is a different type and better joy. Like I would, if I had to choose one or the other. But it's a completely unique joy that's unlike anything else.
Hey, Tony, question about Brian. So you booked Brian to win the tournament, setting him up as number one contender. Are you worried? Can you explain the thinking behind that? And are you worried it's going to undercut your new babyface champion, given that Brian is so over and popular with fans?
I don't think so. I think the fans are conditioned, whether it was like CM Punk and Darby, or CM Punk and Eddie Kingston, or Bryan Danielson and Eddie Kingston. The fans right now are conditioned to great wrestling matches. So Hangman Page versus Bryan Danielson, I think, is one of the best wrestling matches I could possibly give the fans. And especially because Bryan Danielson wrestled the prior champion to a 30-minute draw, I think there's nobody with a better resume. He's been in the company for just over 2 months, but in the time he's been here, nobody has out-wrestled him, and furthermore, nobody has wrestled more than he has. He's taken on everybody and then some. So I think it's the logical challenger based on all the wrestling we've seen from Bryan Danielson since he came in, and now with Hangman Page as a world champion. You want to have the best #1 contender possible, so I think Hangman Page versus Bryan Danielson is a dream match.
Do you have a date for that match?
I'm not going to announce it yet, but I think it's going to be a huge match coming up in the near future. Fans should be really excited about Danielson versus Page for the world title.
Brian, speaking of that match, do you recall your first impressions of Hangman Page when you first saw him? Or was it something where you saw the specialness in him at the beginning, or was it something that came along later?
So it's weird. I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to like uniquely identify somebody as being like, this is an extra special talent, right? And especially when you're looking at AEW when they have so many. So when you say like, okay, who stands out more, Hangman Page or Darby Allin or MJF? I thought MJF and Darby Allin's match, I was watching it, and those two guys are, God, both under 25, right? And they're opening a pay-per-view with just fantastic wrestling, right? So when you look at these guys and you say, oh, who's the standout guy? It's hard to choose until somebody grabs the ball and runs with it. And then all of a sudden you're watching, and Hangman Page is just like, crowds are going nuts for him, and he's starting to catch that. There's something about you, there's something that changes in your mind, like of a performer, when you go from being like, okay, I'm here, and then when you take that next step. And you could see in his performances and in his attitude, the way he carried himself, he took that next step, and you could see he was going to be a star. Now, being the champion and carrying the company, that's a completely different ballgame, and we'll see how he does with that. I don't think he's going to be champion for very long, to be honest. And so, and I know I can be the champion and carry the company. So,
Brian, speaking about the match tonight against Miro, do you think you felt more comfortable doing this match here in AEW instead of maybe doing that match of a few years ago in WWE?
So I will say this. I feel like the best version of myself here in AEW. And I feel like I'm doing some of the best wrestling of my career. Like, I feel like I'm at the peak of my career. And I also feel like I'm able to do stuff that I wasn't able to do before.
Brian, Hangman had some of his best matches in the G1 Climax a couple of years ago. Is that a goal of yours since you want to go around and wrestle fast?
So I've talked to Tony about potentially doing a G1 and all that kind of stuff, but my #1 priority is AEW, and until the quarantine stuff gets better with COVID and all that kind of stuff, I mean, it doesn't even make sense for me to go to Japan, you know, under the current circumstances. And we all cross our fingers hoping that we can go and quick turnaround time and all that kind of stuff, but until that actually changes, you know, I don't even think about it.
Brian, tomorrow Ishii has been announced for Dynamite. Is on your bucket list? Someone you'd like to...
Oh, I'm pissed. I'm pissed at Tony. I could be wrestling tomorrow. I could be wrestling Ishii on Wednesday, but no.
Brian, you mentioned the adjustments that you had to make in the ring and how at your previous employer you're able to split walk through matches. Are there things that you're finding that you weren't able to do there that maybe you're having trouble adjusting to, or is it like riding a bike with some of these things?
So I don't know. When you say having trouble adjusting, like I feel such a sense of joy when I'm wrestling. But when I say that, I've kind of felt that since I came back from retirement, right? So even within the limitations, and there's always limitations when it comes to wrestling on TV. You have certain times, all that kind of stuff. Like, you're never going to be able to go out there and do whatever you want. It just doesn't work like that, right? But I feel like there's a certain amount of joy in just being able to do this thing that I love. and then there's an extra amount of joy given the freedom that we have here at AEW to do kind of what I want within what are always going to be limitations.
Brian, do you think the fans in AEW respond differently to what you do in the ring, and you do things differently as a result compared to the fans in your previous?
So I will say this: what I do think happens is that wrestling is important here, and what happens in the matches is important here. So people are taught to pay attention. One of the negatives sometimes is that when the wrestling isn't the focus, other things become the attention. So then you pay less attention to the wrestling. But I mean, I think AEW's done a fantastic job of the stories being about wrestling, you know, and I think that makes the fans zero in on what's happening in the matches.
Brian, first I want to thank you for what you said earlier this week about companies that show massive profits and lay people off. I think that's a huge problem, and I'm glad you put a spotlight on it. My second question is about the match you had with Kenny Omega. Do you feel that you have unfinished business because it was a classic? It went to a no-limit draw. It went to a draw. Are we going to get another classic?
So I hope I have a million classics. On one sense, another side of my brain is like, I hope I beat everybody in 2 minutes and I don't have to take another fall the rest of my career. But I think I was, to be honest, as I was watching, a little disappointed. I know it's great for the fans that Hangman was the champion, but I mean, there was a part of me that wanted to be the one to take the championship from Kenny Omega, and not only wasn't I able to do that, I wasn't able to beat him. You know what I mean? And Hangman was. So that, like, listen, I don't have a lot of jealousy in me, but there's a part of me that, like, okay, Hangman, let's see what you really got.
Brian, how do you
Last question for Brian or Tony?
Yeah, I'm out here, so please, yeah, go to Brian.
How do you monitor your past head trauma issues? Are you still doing impact testing? Do you feel like you're past that? You know, what are you doing?
So I don't do the impact testing anymore. To be honest, I haven't done an impact test in years and years, but I do regularly keep up with a neurologist where I see it pretty much every month. And there's these new tests called SPECT scans, which monitor the oxygen flow in your brain and all that kind of stuff. And because I keep working on it and keep doing different things, my SPECT scans keep getting better and better to where they're better than your average. I think he said last time it was better than your average 25-year-old with no head trauma. And so I think modern science, and we're gonna see like how valid these SPECT scans are and how valid some of the other stuff is. But I try to be very diligent, because one of the things it's most important to me is being a dad. And and I've seen the best doctors in the country, and all of them have cleared, right? So it's not like I'm going to see these fringe doctors who are just like, oh yeah, you're good to go, buddy, or whatever it is. No, and like even Dr. Joseph Maroon, who I have a lot of respect for, he was the most hesitant, and we had to go through all the due diligence to even get cleared for WWE, because if you don't, that's a huge lawsuit. But my main goal is not to be the best wrestler. It's to be able, like, I'm a relatively old father. My son just turned 1.5 years. When he turns 15, I'm going to be 54, 55. He's going to want to take me down the way that I did when I was 15 with my dad, right? And I'm going to sprawl on him, and I'm going to crush his shoulder. And so, but I want to be, when my daughter asks me about chemistry and how does H2O bond with CO2, I want to be able to say it's H2CO3, right? And like all that kind of stuff. I want to be able to do all that and explain to her chemistry and algebra and calculus and whatever it is that she wants to do. So my goal, that is my number one goal, is to do that. And if I think, or Tony thinks at any point that I'm getting to a point where I won't be able to do that, it's going to be time to stop.
Thank you, Brian.
Yep. Thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.